Backyardigans is a cartoon that shaped the childhood of so many people.
Hi, I'm Pablo.
But did you know it wasn't even supposed to be an animated series at first, but actually a show presented by actors in costumes? We know this because its pilot episode, which had been lost for more than 20 years, eventually leaked on the internet. It followed exactly that idea, with the characters being portrayed by people in costumes. But to really understand how the series changed so much, we have to go back to the very beginning. Janice Burgess was the name of the woman responsible for creating the Backyardigans. Sadly, she has passed away. Back in 1998, she was just another Nickelodeon producer until she came up with the idea of a show about kids playing in a backyard inspired by her own childhood. The pilot was recorded in 1998, but its title was going to be Me and My Friends, a name very similar to Barney and Friends, which is no coincidence. Barney was one of the most popular kids shows of the time, and Janice Burgess was drawing inspiration from it. That's exactly why Me and My Friends was done in live action with costume performers, since that was the same style as Barney and what was trending back then. However, the pilot wasn't approved by Nick, which instead decided to greenlight another show that had also launched a pilot around the same time, Dora the Explorer. Yes, the educational cartoon about a little girl who goes on big adventures while studying other languages. Even so, Nickelodeon saw potential in the idea of Me and My Friends and gave Janice Burgess a second chance. But this time, she had to make it an animated show, and that's how the version of the Backyardigans we know today was born. It's crazy to imagine that this show could have turned out to be something totally different. Want to know more about the very first version of the Backyardigans? Then grab a seat and get ready. Another Cinewave is starting now. Like we said, this pilot is kind of a new discovery because we only got the chance to see it in full starting on June 27, 2025, just about 27 years after it was filmed. During that time, there was a long journey before the episode finally made it online. When the Backyardigans first came out, a journalist named Patrick Zeitz interviewed Janice Burgess about the origins of the cartoon, and that's when she revealed that the show had a pilot version called Me and My Friends, which had been shelved by Nickelodeon. From there, an intense investigation began. For years, groups of fans were searching for this pilot. Little by little, old pictures of actors wearing the Backyardigans costumes started to surface. Small steps, but important ones, until eventually, some organizers of a Backyardigans wiki also made progress in this research. A wiki is a type of site where fans post information about what they love. In this case, the wiki had details about the Backyardigans and the show's various episodes. It made total sense that the organizers would be interested in digging deeper into the pilot, but they ended up doing much more than that. They managed to get in touch with a producer of the lost episode who gave them a VHS copy of the pilot. After that, it seems obvious that they would upload the episode to the wiki, right? Wrong! Instead of sharing the pilot online, they apparently sold the tape to a rare media collector. In case you didn't know, there are people out there with lots of money who love buying extremely hard to find copies of movies, TV episodes, and even lost music. That's because they like owning something almost no one else has, or in the case of this pilot, something absolutely no one else had. Sometime later, the episode did end up leaking online, which means the person who bought it probably decided to release it. The fact that the pilot was live action already stands out a lot, but it also had plenty of other differences compared to the final version of the show. One of those differences was that this very first episode didn't have the main feature of the cartoon, the episodes being about kids diving into an imaginary world while they play, with the entire scenery changing. That idea probably only came about once the series was turned into animation, since it would have been really complicated to pull off those kinds of scenes in live action. They would have had to build a new set for each episode, or use green screen and place background images behind the actors, or even use CGI to create those environments. Any of those options would have been harder to pull off and would have looked weird compared to what happens in the animated version. That's why the original idea was for Me and My Friends to take place entirely in the characters' backyard and focus on them solving simpler, everyday problems. Let's be real, that would have been way more boring, right? The fantasy play in the Backyardigans is the show's big highlight, and without that, it would have just been one more kids program among so many others. If you agree, drop a comment below with #Imagine.
Wow.
Another curious difference this pilot has compared to the final version is the presence of meerkats. Yep, that's exactly what you heard. While the version we know only features the 5 kids, the original version would have had other characters too, and they were meerkats that the kids would talk to. But that wouldn't have been the only purpose of the meerkats. On top of that, they also would have taken on the role of narrators for the episodes, commenting on what was happening for us, the viewers. Totally different from the computer animated episodes, especially because the meerkats wouldn't have been able to describe what was going on in the kids' imagination. Maybe that's why they were cut from the series. It's possible. It could also be because the production team preferred to keep the wacky stuff inside the kids' imagination during playtime. That would have only worked if they had decided the meerkats were part of the kids' imagination too, but in that case they could have only appeared during the play sequences, right? Alright, now let's talk a bit about what happens in this pilot episode, so you can better understand the differences it has compared to the rest of the show. This episode would have been focused on Pablo. We have no idea if that means he would have been the main character instead of Uniqua, or if he was just the protagonist of this one specific episode. Anyway, the episode revolved around Pablo having trouble being patient while waiting for Uniqua, who was bringing some items so they could build some flags. Then Uniqua showed up and the kids made the flags, but Pablo realized once again that he had to wait since the glue holding the flags together was going to take some time to dry. Pablo only managed to handle this by starting to sing a song listing all the things he could do while waiting, showing that at least the music, the same music the animated series is also so well known for, was already right there from the very beginning, which is really cool to know. This really shows what we mentioned earlier about the show originally being set entirely in the backyard. Instead of focusing on imaginative play itself, it showed the Backyardigans dealing with different issues while playing. Since the show went through such drastic changes, another pilot had to be made for the series to be approved. After it was decided that the Backyardigans would be a cartoon, a test episode done in computer animation, more similar to the final version, was produced. What's interesting is that the animation was made through motion capture, with dancers performing the movements of the main characters. The result unfortunately wasn't that great, since the dancers' bodies were way too different from the main characters, with completely different proportions. You really can't blame the actors though, right? It's kinda hard to have the same body shape as a penguin or a moose. Sure, the characters are humanoid, but still. Because of that, the animators had to go back and fix a lot of the animations, meaning this idea of using motion capture ended up hurting more than it helped in the long run. Even so, this pilot was considered good enough for Nickelodeon to agree to produce the show. And that was a pretty smart choice, since the Backyardigans went on to become a huge success. For the rest of the cartoon, motion capture was scrapped. The movements of the dancers recorded before the musical numbers were only used as guides for the production team, who then created the animations entirely from scratch. A massive amount of work. Not like hitting the subscribe button, which takes zero effort and makes sure you'll always get our videos about your favorite cartoons. Besides those two pilot episodes, the Backyardigans also got a brand new version in 2024. Yep, a remake, but not a very good one. Basically, Nickelodeon recreated the musical clips from the original series with a different animation style, and only the clips, because the remake doesn't actually count as a full-on show. But longtime fans of the Backyardigans really didn't enjoy the result, mostly because the animation style was considered way too artificial and lacking in personality, to the point of it being compared to animations generated by artificial intelligence. Another insult many people used was cheap knockoff and a cash grab attempt with zero respect for the original work. Yep, the reception was pretty ugly, and the criticism hit hard. This remake ends up being more proof that there's no point in using beloved productions just to try to squeeze as much money out of them as possible without putting in the effort. Nostalgia can boost the chances of a production being successful, but when there's no quality, it backfires. So what do you think about that? One thing all these versions of the Backyardigans have in common is that in each one, a character is missing. In the first pilot, Austin doesn't even show up, even though he was already planned to appear later on. In the second pilot, things get even worse, because Austin still doesn't appear, and now Tasha is also missing. Only Uniqua, Pablo, and Tyrone are there. And you know what's even funnier? The exact same thing happens in the remake of the Backyardigans. For some reason that's hard to explain, Tasha and Austin were erased from existence, and only the trio mentioned before appears in those video clips. On top of that curious detail, the characters' appearances are also different across the three versions. In the live-action pilot, the two shades of pink on Uniqua's body are very different, with one being much lighter than the other. In the final version, the shades are much closer. As for Tyrone, the stripes on his shirt were black instead of blue. In the second pilot, the characters look much closer to the final version. The animation is just a bit different, probably because pilot episodes are usually done by smaller animation teams. As for the remake, don't even get me started. The characters are all round and wide-eyed, thanks to the completely different animation style compared to the old series. Honestly, it's better if we all just pretend this was never released. So now, how about picking one of the two videos we've left on your screen to keep having fun with us? Thanks, and see you next time!